Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RAMP, Real Access Motivates Progress, weekly podcast. We are so excited for you to join us the entire month of July because we have a lot of important people. Not that every week isn't important, but we have some really special episodes, starting with the kickoff one with the Rhode Island Department of Health, Dr. Jim McDonald. Thank you, Dr. McDonald, for joining us tonight. We are so honored to have you with us this evening.
Oh, Tina, thank you for inviting me. I'm joining you from my dining room tonight, and I'm excited. Be a ton of fun tonight.
Oh, that's awesome. It's like we all have our own personal doctor in the house tonight, so we can learn all about the stuff that you probably teach your own family and the rest of the state. So we appreciate it. Why don't you start everybody off with a little background of who you are? Not that everybody doesn't know you by now, but in case those one or two people who don't, they can learn a little bit about you tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. So I'm Dr. Jim McDonald. I'm the medical director of the Rhode Island Department of Health. I live in North Kingstown, Rhode Island, with my wife, Gail, 3 kids. There are 2 dogs here. I don't know that Rosebud and Daisy will make an appearance tonight, but just full disclosure, they're in the house tonight. I am board certified in pediatrics and preventive medicine. I've actually worked in multiple areas of this world. So I've served in the U.S. Navy, which brought me to Okinawa, Japan, Oakland, California, Bethesda, Maryland. I've been in private practice in Pennsylvania, right in the heart of Amish country. I used to work in the Indian Health Service in the heart of the Navajo Nation in Arizona. And I've also been in Tennessee. So I've been in Rhode Island for 13 years now. And I feel like Tina, I was a New Englander misplaced at birth. This is where home actually felt like it was actually home for me. So it's great to be with you tonight.
Oh, we are so honored to have you, and you have done a tremendous job of keeping everybody informed, and I love listening to you speak because you break it down for those of us who really don't know what we're talking about, and we get the real story. So thank you for that, and we truly appreciate that. So let's talk all things COVID right now and how that affects the disability and elderly community, because we are the most vulnerable and we are the population that, needs to worry the most. So where do you think that we stand at this moment in time, vaccination wise, pandemic wise, and with all of the variants?
Yeah, I think right now, I think about it this way, Tina. There's Team Human and there's Team Virus. And Team Human, we've been doing really good lately. We're doing really good, but Team Virus got a new player. And their new player is called the Delta variant. And I'm keeping my eye on that new player, Team Virus, the Delta variant, because the Delta variant is definitely more contagious. It's causing more cases. And when I say a variant, what I'm really talking about, Tina, is the virus just changes over time. When we think about the original wild type SARS-CoV-2, it's changed over time. And earlier this year, we talked about the Alpha variant, B117. Then we talked about the Beta variant, then the Gamma variant, now the Delta variant. And really, quite frankly, some people are like, why do you keep changing the names of these things? And quite frankly, it's because the virus has changed a little bit. Fortunately, though, as of today, our vaccines still work against all the variants circulating in Rhode Island and the United States. And the monoclonal antibody from the Regeneron still is effective too against the variants. And I say the variants because that wild type isn't around anymore. Really, when you think about what people are getting infected with today, you're either getting infected with the Alpha variant or the Delta variant. The Alpha variant is the B117 that originated in the United Kingdom. The Delta variant is the one that originated in India. And we're kind of moving away from where these things originated because people start thinking about where, as opposed to like that would be a reason to assign blame when it has nothing to do with anything. It's just the virus is going to mutate. It could have easily started anywhere in the world. It just happened to start in those places.
Right. Well, thank you for that. Where do you see the state right now on a vaccination, and how well it's doing for us at this moment?
Yeah, so Tina, Rhode Island has done very well with vaccinations. We're 77% of the population, of the adult population, has at least 1 dose. And, we're really approaching almost 70% getting both doses. So we're really heading in the right direction in that regard. And part of why I think Rhode Island has done well is Rhode Island's always been a vaccine-friendly state. In other words, when you look historically, Rhode Island's always been one of the top states in the country at accepting vaccines. I think other things about the vaccine rollout in Rhode Island is it kind of made sense to people after we explained it. Like, one of the things that you saw in the beginning was it wasn't first come, first served. Like, we started in nursing homes. We started with the people who are most vulnerable. Then we brought in healthcare workers, and then we started getting people to a certain age, and we eventually got to people with underlying conditions. But there was a plan and there's a strategy. The strategy in Rhode Island was try to get the high risk people first, make sure you have a workforce to take care of the people who are going to get sick. And that was different than some other states that really did sort of a first come, first served model. And what you saw with those, like, you could almost make that tortoise and hare comparison, if you will. We started out slow, and I remember in the beginning, people were saying, why is Rhode Island at the bottom of the pack? Well, when you looked at health outcomes, we ended up in a much better place because we kept people out of the hospital, kept more people alive, and we've had a much better penetration to our entire population than some of the other states that start out kind of like, well, anybody can get it who wants it. And so I think to that degree, Rhode Island's a state that likes vaccines. We still have some improvement. We still have some ways to go, and we still have more people who want to get vaccinated. But, in the 12 and older crowd right now in Rhode Island, we've done pretty well.
That's great. What is it? I mean, they're saying like 60% of the people who unfortunately succumb to COVID, were in the disability or elderly population. Where do you think that you see the disabled population in the vaccine rate? Are we tracking that? Or, what I mean? Is it just kind of like a free for all? And what I mean? We don't know where we stand for that community.
Yeah, it's interesting. The disability community is a very diverse community. A lot of different types of disabilities and a lot of different types of people in there. But we don't track in Rhode Island, nor do we think any state does in particular, like, what is the vaccine rate in the disability community? Overall, I think we've seen really good uptake of the vaccine. But it's interesting. I think people who have disabilities, they're sort of they're at higher risk for several different reasons. One reason is the disability may put you at higher risk, depending on what your disability is. But sometimes the disadvantages, the disability actually may prevent you from getting the vaccine just because of access to the vaccine, which is something that we've really tried to solve in Rhode Island. Like, we've really tried to make sure every place we gave vaccine was a place that was ADA compliant and you could get the vaccine. And one of the things we did in Rhode Island too is we brought vaccines to people's homes. Like, if we didn't do it at first, but we got it going eventually, was if you couldn't come to us, we subcontracted with some folks to get the vaccine to your home. I mean, there's several thousand people who've gotten vaccine at home. And I think what it speaks to is, trying to meet people where they are. It's interesting, Tina, in the beginning of the vaccine rollout, we gave our first vaccine in Rhode Island December 14th, 2020. So really just about 7 months ago. But for the first, 4 months, so the end of April, the demand for vaccine was just ferocious. And I mean ferocious. It was an interesting time in the state. Once we got to the end of April, though, you really saw the vaccine supply was more robust and it exceeded demand. And we're still in that spot. And I see us in that spot for the rest of the pandemic right now. In other words, what I see is we have much more vaccine than we have demand right now, which is not a bad place to be. Because it means a lot of people have gotten the vaccine. I'm very proud of Rhode Islanders. I think Rhode Islanders have done a great job of accepting the vaccine. In other parts of the country don't have that success that we've had so far, which, and that's an advantage for us. And I think, one of the things I want to underscore, Tina, is I'd prefer you get vaccine immunity than natural immunity. In other words, natural immunity is you got them from acquiring the disease. So especially for folks who are disabled, that means, one, if you got the disease, you had to survive it. And that's not something we take for granted. And I think the other thing is I'd rather not people suffer with the disease they didn't need to. But I think one of the key things we need to remember is the SARS-CoV-2 is a coronavirus. And one of the things we said at the beginning of the pandemic, well over 16 months ago, was you don't normally get lifelong immunity from coronaviruses. They cause the common cold. And they're just one of those common cold viruses. So we don't think that natural immunity will occur from natural. We don't think you'll get long-term immunity from natural infection, whereas we do think you're going to have a better shot at getting that from the vaccine. I think that's one reason why people should think about, hey, I should make sure if I didn't get the vaccine already, I should get that.
All right. I agree with you. I do believe it's a personal choice, and you need to make sure you're checking in with your personal doctor, because I caught coronavirus in January. I was isolated, home alone, and we think I got it from a delivery that just happened to, contract it that way. I have long-term effects from COVID. I still have symptoms from January from coronavirus. I am not vaccinated at this moment, but I'm also working from home and still pretty much isolated. So there's not a rush for me. And like I said, with me having a stroke and a heart attack on Mother's Day, puts me a little bit at higher risk to adding something else to my body that when I'm not fully recovered from as well. But I want to talk real world. The disabled community has some hesitation because of their disability, because of side effects from the medications that they're taking for their disability, or underlying issues outside of their disability that they may have. What are some of the things that this community should be asking their doctor or looking for or concerned about, or what should relax them to not think so much about?
Yeah. So the first thing to make sure is, do you have a doctor? And do you have a doctor you trust is the second thing. And a part of why I say that is, it's interesting. My oldest son is disabled. He's on the autism spectrum. He's got some cognitive issues. But, when it came time for Noah to get the vaccine, when his age group became eligible, Noah was one of the first in line, partly because he saw me every day with the pandemic and he trusted his dad. And the point I want to raise there is, if you have someone you trust as an expert, then you're going to be very likely to just listen to that expert. And part of why I say it that way is that these vaccines, particularly the messenger RNA vaccines, they're different than other vaccines we've given before. And I think people had a hard time understanding the science. And because messenger RNA vaccines are different. I get a shot in my left arm when I got the vaccine, but that messenger RNA, which was surrounded by little fat molecules, that's fine, goes into the skeletal muscle, little muscle cells in my arm. I don't have that big a muscle, Tina. It's there though, right? And then the muscle cells in the cytoplasm, the little outer covering, that's where the messenger RNA. And what messenger RNA is, it's like a little blueprint. It's like a little construction crew. And messenger RNA cells said to the cells, I want you to go make a protein, put it on the outside of that cell. And the protein looked like the spike protein of the virus. Now, it didn't tell my body to make the virus and make the spike protein. When my immune system saw the spike protein for the first time, it said, oh, that's not supposed to be here. We're going to make antibodies against it. And it did. And it's interesting because, Tina, you referenced side effects. And I think we're used to the word side effect, but it's really not a side effect. It's really an immune response. Because what did I get after I got my vaccine? I got a sore arm for 2 or 3 days. After the second one, I got a sore arm and a little bit of fatigue for 6 hours or so. And that was something I rolled in. So I think one thing is, 1, find a doctor. 2, find a doctor you trust. 3 is try to understand the science. Because if you understand the science of how the vaccine works, it really makes people feel a little bit calm about it. I think the 4th thing to work on is understand the disease. And why do some people have a problem with SARS-CoV-2 and others not so much? One of the things about this virus in particular, Tina, was, why was it successful at causing a pandemic? Because it didn't have to be successful, but it was successful because it made people sick and it made some people pass away, but it made more people not sick. In other words, because the virus had so many people who just weren't sick, it was very efficient at spreading itself because these people who weren't sick were running all over the place. The other thing about this virus that made it uniquely able to cause a pandemic was its long incubation period. So someone who was spreading disease was, I'm contagious for, 2 to 14 days. That's a long time to be running around the state or the country spreading your disease. And I think these are some of the key things, but it was a significant pandemic because it affected enough people that ended up in the hospital, and it was possible to overwhelm countries' healthcare systems. It's kind of interesting. Even today, you're seeing some states where there's low vaccine uptake. Even today, 16 and a half months into the pandemic, some hospitals are still getting overwhelmed and still looking for ventilators because they're just not able to handle the influx of patients. And part of why I give you that as context is if you understand the science of how this virus caused the pandemic, then you want to go into your brain and say, well, why does it make some people sick and some people not so much? This has a lot to do with just the word inflammation. And for some people, it really caused a lot of inflammation. And inflammation in end organs like your kidney or like your heart or like your brain. Some people end up with strokes, heart attacks, heart inflammation. Kidney failure was very common. It caused all kind of problems in some people, and that's why I ended up in the hospital. But it's interesting, where we are right now, we have treatment that works with the monoclonal antibodies. We have a vaccine that prevents disease. We also have a lot smarter doctors and nurses in the hospital because they know how to treat the disease a lot more. Keep in mind, it was a new disease 16 and a half months ago. People had to figure out when's the best time to put you on the ventilator, what's the best way to prevent you from getting on the ventilator, and what are ways to prevent those blood clots from forming. All that stuff had to be figured out. It's amazing how fast science worked in all this process.
It's true. But I want to talk a little bit more real because I've known a lot of people who've gotten the vaccine. Some had no issues at all, like you said, a sore arm or a little bit of fatigue. Some were sick for days or weeks from the vaccine, and I know this puts hesitation into people. And how do we overcome that? How do we explain, you know what I mean, why you should get the vaccine and what you should expect? You know what I mean? And that is that normal or not normal? Because, people say we rush to a vaccine. Others say it's been in the works for years. Where do you put us in all of that?
Yeah, so the technology for the vaccine is a little over a decade old. Like, in other words, there was another messenger RNA vaccine for SARS, the first one, but it wasn't used because that virus wasn't successful at causing a pandemic. I think that's one thing to keep in mind. It's not super new. And I don't think the vaccine was rushed. I think it was prioritized. Like when you think about how our country approached creating a vaccine, none of the steps were skipped in making the vaccine. What did happen, though, is our federal government said, here's money to the companies that will show us the best chance of making success. And it's a lot of money, but you got to make this work. And, one of the things the United States did right, I think other countries weren't quite as good at it, was the United States was able to leverage its financial resources connected to its science and technology and pharmaceutical companies and make this work. Like, interestingly enough, Moderna, which is a small company in Massachusetts, which had yet to bring a product to market, had a massive infusion of money from Operation Warp Speed. And they created a great vaccine that works great, and we're thrilled to have it. Pfizer partnered with a European company called BioNTech, didn't take the Operation Warp Speed money, but actually made their own messenger RNA vaccine as well. So and Pfizer's a huge pharmaceutical company that's been, around for many decades. They invented drugs, back when antibiotics were a brand new thing. And, there are all kinds of pharmaceutical products out there. So Pfizer's a very big multinational conglomerate. But you saw these two different companies, this one big behemoth of a company, Pfizer, and this really, small pharmaceutical company in Cambridge, Massachusetts called Moderna, yet they both created life-changing, world-changing vaccines. So I think that's part of the science. Part of what I want to say, though, about getting comfortable with a vaccine is getting comfortable with a vaccine is really a personal journey because it was new for all of us, but it was prioritized. It wasn't rushed because none of the steps were really skipped in the research. And it's a lot of people were studied in the phase 3 clinical trials. What's interesting too now is we're talking about in our country alone, over 180 million people have gotten the vaccine. That's a lot of people. And across the globe, we're talking about over 2 billion people have gotten the vaccine. So really, about a quarter of the planet has gotten the vaccine so far. And in our country, well over half of the people have gotten at least one dose. I think that when you get to other issues, though, like what do you expect after getting the vaccine? The majority of people are going to feel something the next day. In other words, over 70% of the people are going to have a sore arm. So if you're pitching for the Red Sox, I'd get the vaccine on an off day. I wouldn't do it in the day you're pitching because I think you're just asking for it then, right? But some people are going to get a headache. Some people are going to get, a fever. Some people are going to feel tired. And really this gets to a lot of people have what's called an immune response. And when I say immune response, Tina, think of it this way. When you get a viral infection, how do you feel the next day? Well, the thing is, most of us don't really feel the symptoms of viral infection till the virus has been running around our body for several days. Because what are we feeling is our immune system responding to the virus. So our white blood cells, which are going to kill that virus, are going to create some inflammation. When they create some inflammation, we're going to be achy. We're going to have a little bit of release of some of those chemicals, going to cause a fever. It's just simply an immune response. And one of the things I kind of just say to people is like, at least it's working, right? And now you don't have to have the immune response to have the vaccine work. We know it works for people because some people get the vaccine and they just do marvelous. Nothing happens. But the majority of people, well over 70%, they've got a sore arm and they got a story to tell about it too. And it is a little bit more noticeable after that second dose, by the by. In other words, after that second dose of vaccine, most people say, yeah, it's more noticeable. But it does give you good protection. It really does. And I think that's an important thing is I'm amazed we got these done so quickly. Again, not because they're rushed, but because they're prioritized. And it's one of those things where, like if I 18.5 months ago, 10 months into the pandemic, I'm going to have 2 vaccines that work for you. And oh, by the way, I'll have monoclonal antibody to treat you. I think all of us would have signed up for that bargain because if you remember back to the beginning of the pandemic, one of the things we said to folks was, we're doing all these public health measures, shutting everything down till we, 1, get a vaccine or 2, get a treatment. In under 10.5 months, we had both. And not because of me, but because of the power of science and partnering with government to fund it, to make it work. So I think in some ways, that's one of the positives I take out of the pandemic.
Yeah, like I said, again, I agree with you. I want to talk more about, I was hospitalized in May with a stroke and a heart attack. Now, I spent a couple of weeks in the hospital. Not once when I was in the hospital was I asked if I received the shot, if I wanted the shot, if I wanted more information about the shot. So I kind of thought, okay, maybe it's because of why I'm here, the heart attack and stroke. But I've talked to several other people who were disabled and they never got questioned as well when they were in the hospital. But yet a lot of my able-bodied friends who happened to go to the hospital around the same time were asked almost on every shift by the nursing. So this sets a precedent to people of our community. Are we not important? Are we not prioritized? Why are they not asking us? And it makes them a little bit more hesitant. What do you say to put them at ease? Or what do you say to the hospitals of what they should be doing different to making sure that everybody is accounted for and everybody is getting the opportunity?
Tina, I think one of the things you bring up is, why do doctors and nurses treat some people differently than other people? Because that's just wrong, right? And part of what that gets to is notions of implicit bias. And I know bias isn't a comfortable word for people, but one of the things about implicit bias, because sometimes when people hear the word bias, they get defensive saying, oh, I'm not biased. Well, newsflash, all of us have biases. In other words, all of us grew up with certain ideas, and we just grew up with these ideas, and they've made us think a certain way. We've developed patterns of thought. And some of those patterns of thought are really helpful and healthy. Some of those patterns of thought are negative and destructive. And part of what learning does for us when we learn new concept is we learn different patterns of thought. And then that way we actually see things differently. We have different understanding. So are people who are disabled discriminated against? Yes, they are. And that's wrong. And that shouldn't happen. And the illustration you gave is understanding attitudes of healthcare providers. Like one of the things, I've learned recently, talking to some people in the disability community, is that certain healthcare providers have attitudes. Probably 80% of healthcare providers have attitudes where they think because someone's disabled, they have a lower quality of life. That's implicit bias. And that's a problem. And changing people's attitudes takes time. So I think one of the things healthcare providers do need to do is look for continuing medical education about understanding people with disabilities and other cultural awareness issues. I think that's really important because, quite frankly, what you describe, you're in a hospital for something pretty serious, right? Heart attack and a
Yeah.
stroke. I don't care who you are. That's memorable. That's like, I might not survive this. But while you're there, one of the things that you're saying is, look, I'm here. Can I have a conversation about a vaccine? And that sounds like a missed opportunity because you were there, Now, part of it,
Yeah.
part of it could be people just weren't thinking that way. Part of it could be people's preconceived notions, but it really leads itself to a missed opportunity because you were there. And one of the things about that moment for you was like you had access to your doctors, your nurses. You could ask your questions and get tailored information. So I think one of the things, that we have to be honest about is doctors and nurses have I think I'm going to say some mental journeys to occur and understanding a little bit more about like, gee, what is my own implicit bias? Because I think sometimes people look at people with disabilities and they start feeling bad. The people I know who are disabled, including the people in my own family, don't want me to feel bad. They just want me to treat them the same way I treat everybody else and
Right.
accommodate whatever disability I can. I mean, I had said this to you earlier. My wife lost vision in her right eye a couple Valentine days ago. It was really all of a sudden we think it was a side effect of the chemotherapy she was getting, and she took a wonderful approach to it. Her approach was, well, I'm thankful to be alive 10 years after my ovarian cancer. I'm thankful I have one eye left. And you know what? I would have done this bargain any day. If I would have traded vision in one eye to still be alive 10 years later to enjoy my family, she would have made that bargain. And so she's got a positive attitude and she'd roll with it, which I think speaks to some of her resilience and some of her, you can't get me down. I'm just going to keep going on life. And I think it speaks to sometimes, one of the things that, I see in certain people is they demonstrate a fair amount of resilience, a certain amount of personal power to overcome. There's a purpose to my life. There's something I'm going to do today that's going to be positive, going to matter for people. So I think these are some of the complex issues we need to think about with this area. But I think getting back to your original issue about vaccine and being comfortable with the vaccine, like a lot of life, it's a personal journey and how comfortable you're going to be. And one of the things I suggest to people is keep your mind open to science, find people you trust, but get information from experts. Because one of the things we do know is that people with disabilities are at higher risk of acquiring disease, but also higher risk of having a harder time with it. And what we don't really want is people to succumb to this disease. For people who aren't comfortable with the vaccine, I do think they need to remember, though, there is treatment, right? Those monoclonal antibodies do work. So if you do acquire the disease, make sure you talk to your doctor about a monoclonal antibody because that Regeneron product works well for people.
Yeah. Like I said, again, I was missed opportunity twice. Once in January when I went into the hospital and they tested me for COVID and I'm like, there's no way, I've been home alone. You know what I mean? But you got to test me. I think so. And I had COVID. I never was offered the mononuclear. Now, why? I was at the beginning stages of COVID and never offered. And now the second one, when I was in the hospital, I was never offered. So things like this is where you need to be number one, your own advocate. I waited till like the days I was getting ready to go home to raise the awareness to the doctors and nurses and say, hey, look, why wasn't I asked? Why wasn't I brought this? No one had an answer to me, but at least I brought it to their attention. So it had a conversation somewhere in the backdrop of somebody saying, why didn't we ask her? Why didn't we offer her that? And other people, because like I said, I've talked to people who were in many different hospitals around the state of Rhode Island. None of them were asked. So it wasn't like one particular hospital or one set of doctors. It seemed to be, but this is where the disability community feels maybe it's not right for them. So what questions should they be asking their doctors to put their mind at ease? Because obviously some doctors don't make them a priority for this.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to vaccine questions is I would ask your question. And the reason I said ask your question, like when I talk to my patients about the vaccine, I ask, what is your question? And part of why I say it that way, Tina, is like I still see patients. I'm a pediatrician, right? I still see patients on Fridays. What I find about my patients, though, is that they have their question. And if I create a trusting space for them, they'll ask their question. And sometimes their question is something I can answer. And sometimes that's what they want. Like one of the things I've noticed about my patients is they've known me They trust me. And a lot of times they want my answer to their question. Part of how I bring that personal connection in is there's nothing that quite comes close in life to that physician-patient relationship, because I know my patients. Most of them I've known for quite a long time, and I know them well. So I think part of it is find your question. Part of what underscore it's your question is don't find the internet's question, don't find social media's question, and don't find the politician's question, because that doesn't matter to you. What matters to you is what is your question, because what you want to know is, to my doctor, is this right for me? Because doctor, you know me better than anyone else knows me. You know the inside and the outside. So if you find your question, and then what I do as a doctor, what I try to do is I listen to my patient ask their question. I try to give them their answer. And the reason I'm just giving their answer is that's what they wanted to know. What I try to answer for them is, what is it that you really wanted to know about your question? And part of what I'm saying is it depends where they're coming from, because some people come from a position of curiosity. Some people come from a position of anxiety, but some people come from a position of fear. And if I don't know where they're coming from, I'm not giving them the answer they need.
Yeah. And if you have a disability, you have more than one doctor. So I agree with you asking your question, because my question was, and I asked every one of my 5 primary doctors that I have, with what I just went through, is it right for me? With some of the vaccinations and me having clotting issues and stroke issues, is it right for me at this time? What is my area? Like, I'm not going out right now. Is it a rush for me right now, for me to get vaccinated when I'm not out in public, when I'm not around people, when I'm home? You know what I mean? So you can take your time and you can trust your doctors and ask more than one. And I'll tell you, 2 out of 5 of my doctors right off the get-go said, you know what? I don't know the answer right now. Let me get back to you. That meant more to me than them coming up and giving me a lame answer that they didn't really stand behind and believe. Then they found out the answer and they called me back later. It is okay not to know the answer right away. And this is what I'm putting the plea out to the doctors. Be honest with your patients. If you don't know, go look up the answer and call them back later. They will have more respect for you, and they already trust you, because I've been with my doctors for years. So when they say no, I take that to heart. When they say yes, I trust them, because that's why I chose them as my doctors. And I appreciate your answer, because it's true. It's your question that matters. It's the personal preference. Don't go by anybody else. You want to be seen as an individual. Treat yourself as an individual and don't lump yourself into the grand scheme of things. Don't go along with the crowd. Don't do it because everybody else is doing it and it's the in thing. Do what's right and make an affordable decision for yourself with your doctor.
Yeah, and Tina, that's great advice. I think it speaks to the power of you and the power of you getting your information. And then and part of why I think that's so important is one of the things that I worry a little bit about is there's so much data input in our lives. There's just so much information, but sometimes it's just quite frankly noise. And what I'm looking for is just having a conversation with my patient about their question. And one of the things I think it's really important is, particularly in the beginning of the pandemic, when we're trying to really vaccinate the entire state, we had everybody going to mass vaccination sites. And those mass vaccination sites were great for us. One of the things I'm really happy about now, though, is that we've really moved the vaccine a lot to doctors' offices. So now, more than ever, the doctor you're seeing probably has vaccine in their office. And we figured out ways to get the storage just right, get the administration just right in doctors' offices. And I think it sets it up for a more usual practice of medicine and a more normal experience where you don't have a rushed conversation and you feel like it. And, physicians are trained to have normal conversations with you. It should never feel confrontational in an exam room. Like, physicians aren't lawyers. We're not trained to debate with our patients. We're really trained to actually have conversations, do something called shared decision making, and come up with the idea of risks of acquiring the disease versus the benefits of acquiring the vaccine, and making customized, personalized recommendations. And then, patients decide what they want. Because really right now, that's really what it comes down to is, for a patient, it's like, I have to look at the risk of acquiring disease versus the benefit of acquiring the vaccine in an ever-changing dynamic, because the Delta variant is still the wild card. Because it's a bit of the wild card. Like, one of the things I've said to people is, if you had COVID in 2020, you probably aren't protected against the Delta variant because it's a different enough virus that your body's still at risk. Now, the reinfection rates are still low, but that's partly because we've had such good vaccine uptake that our whole prevalence is getting much better. One of the things we see in Rhode Island is the prevalence. In other words, the number of people at any given time who have disease has really been steadily declining over the last several months, which puts us in a great place. Our hospitalization numbers are better too. And, I was looking at the data this morning. We haven't had a death in over a week, which is a great thing. I'd love it if there was no more deaths from this disease. It really would be a great thing to see.
Yeah, like I said, I can't agree. One of the best things that I've seen out of this whole pandemic is families making their own decisions personally for themselves. I know husbands have gotten the vaccine and wives have not, or vice versa, or they're making a personal decision for themselves. And there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of misconception. There is a lot of bad rumors that just are not true. And I can't stress it enough to have that conversation with your physician or a physician if you don't have a physician. Have that conversation personally, because again, you're an individual and your life is your life. Nobody else can live your life but you. You need to make it a personal. What would you blanket say to everybody to make that common sense decision for them?
So here's something to think about. If you're someone who, before the vaccine came out, made up your mind not to get it, and that's about 13% of the population, I would invite you just to think about what you did. In other words, even if before the vaccine came out, you said, I'm not getting it, maybe it's time to actually go look at a conversation with the person in the mirror and say, am I really making the best decision for myself? And it's really about you making a decision for you. It's not about how other people think about you. So one of life's little mysteries is stop caring what other people think about you, by the way. That's not healthy, because what's best for you? And if you go in the mirror and say, you know what, I've actually thought about it and now I've decided to change my mind, then you go get the vaccine. And I don't think you should care what other people think. You go get it. Because if you made up your mind not to get vaccine before it came out, what you did was you made up your mind without enough information. And that probably isn't good for us to do that. So that's one way of thinking about this issue. I think another way for people to think about this issue, if you're someone who's just saying, I'm just not sure, I don't really have the confidence to get the vaccine, part of what you want to look at, I think, is where am I getting my information? And part of why I say where you're getting information from is that, when you think about just making any life decision in general, almost always you want to find an expert. Like if you have a problem with your taxes and you're worried about the Internal Revenue Service coming after you aren't going to get on social media and see what advice is, nor are you going to get on the internet or look at the major news sources and say, gee, you're going to hire a tax attorney because tax attorneys know how to deal with the Internal Revenue Service and going to help you. It's also true that if you had a major plumbing problem in your house, like if you had a major plumbing problem in your house, you need that stuff to work, you're not going to get on news media saying, gee, I wonder what the news media says to fix about my plumbing problem. I got leaking faucets someplace. Nor are you going to get on social media. You're going to call a plumber and you have an expert come to your home and get your system working, right? Now, we make these decisions all the time in our lives. We find experts. What's interesting about healthcare, though, is we tend to think we're all experts, and we're not. It's funny. I'll say this to you. In order for me to become a physician, I gave up my 20s and then some. So whatever you were doing during your 20s, I wasn't doing that. I was studying to be a doctor, right? In other words, 5 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of training, then another 2 years and so I spent a ton of time learning how to do what I do, and I still learn every day, and every day I learn new things. So if I spend a decade and a half acquiring my expertise and find I need to learn every day, When I approach my patient with a recommendation, it's coming with a great deal of expertise and thought around it. Hey, Tina, I'm not always right, but I really have at least done my homework, and I'm going to tell my patient this is my best advice for you. And part of why I say it that way is I find that sometimes we're confused that when your doctor gives you advice, it's equally as important as what your best friend thinks. And your best friend cares about you, but the best friend probably doesn't have the same expertise as your doctor. Now, your best friend may be right sometimes, and maybe your doctor was wrong, but that's the exception, right? And part of what I'm getting at is, it's funny, there's a local author named Dr. Tom Nichols wrote a book, The Death of Expertise. It's one of my favorite books he wrote in 2018. He's a professor at the War College. But I think sometimes in our culture, we've confused information and access to information with expertise, and it's not the same thing. So when you're really talking to someone, I would ask yourself, are they really a bona fide expert? Because if they don't have training in molecular biology, if they don't have training in healthcare and medicine, then I'm not sure who you're talking to. You're probably talking to someone who has a vested interest in you, but you really want to talk to an expert. Because if it was good enough for your toilet and good enough for your taxes to find an expert, it's good enough for your body.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, I have a spinal cord injury. I suffered a stroke to my spinal cord. I know my body. When I go to the hospital, you don't want to try to an IV there because it's not going to work. You want to try over here. This is the best remedy for this. I know my symptoms. But just because I know my disability doesn't mean I know everybody's disability. So my best friends who are in the disability community, I will not say one way or another, get it or not get it. I say, go talk to your doctor because your doctor does know what's best for you. I do not. Just because I have a disability and I know my body does not mean I know your body. So the best thing that you can do, I love the saying that you are not supposed to know what other people think of you. That is none of your business, what somebody's opinion of you. You be the best person you can be and don't give advice where you're not an expert. Like, I will never tell anybody, get the shot, don't get the shot. I say, go talk to your doctor. Go talk to somebody you trust who knows what they're talking about this disease, this vaccination, and you. Not me. I'm not the person. I love you. I care about you. I want what's best. I will be there for whatever decision you make, but it's your decision to make.
Yeah, I think Tina have some really good advice there. And I just think one little word of freedom that I found in life is when I got to the point in my life where I stopped caring what other people thought about me, I really was a much happier person in life. Because at some point it's like, who are you trying to please? It just doesn't work, And it doesn't mean I don't listen to people who I love and respect, but it's like, I don't really care what people think about me anymore. I don't have the time for that kind of thing. And part of what I think is important is I think sometimes as Americans in particular, we're rugged individualists. I used to live in Japan. I was in the Navy. I used to live in Japan. One of the things I learned about the Japanese culture was it was a very utilitarian collective culture. People were very interested in doing what was good for the population. That's great. That's just their culture. In the United States, we're rugged individualists. We're just a different people. Not that they're right and we're wrong. We're just different. I think sometimes, though, as Americans, though, we identify so much with that individualism that we sometimes do things that aren't in our own best interest. We literally sometimes bite our nose to spite our face. And it doesn't even feel good when we do it. And I worry sometimes when I see people have made decisions about the vaccine in particular, they're taking a little bit of risk. And part of what I want to do is just separate identifying with, way we grew up. We all grew up here. This is our rugged individualism from why you assuming risk. And it gets back to the concept I brought in earlier about this virus. Why was it successful at causing a pandemic? Had a long incubation period, up to 14 days. But also the majority of people weren't that sick. So when the majority of people weren't that sick, you would know people who had it who, quite frankly, were not in the hospital or did not pass away. So that creates a false sense of like, oh, it's not that big a deal. But yet we know when we think about how many people passed away in Rhode Island, thousands. How many people were in the hospital? Tens of thousands. How many people have died in this country? Over 600,000. We start thinking about like, oh my gosh, there's nothing like this. And it's funny, there's no flu that compared to this. Like, just out of curiosity, I don't know if people want to guess, but we had no cases, no flu deaths in Rhode Island last year. None. That's something we've never seen before, but that's because of those public health measures. But even a terrible flu season, we would rarely see 100 deaths. in a terrible flu season in Rhode Island, we saw thousands of deaths from this disease, thousands. And it really did create a profound impact on our state. And the public health measures caused, a lot of people just to think about life a different way here. But that's something that's so far behind us right now. And I think the vaccine is what brought us to that success. And if you really think about what made Team Human able to at least get control of Team Virus for a while, it's the vaccine. And why I think you see people a little bit nervous on a national level is when you look at Team Human across the United States, Team Virus is that with this new player, this Delta virus, this Delta variant, the Delta variant has given Team Virus hope for a chance to actually beat Team Human again. And what we're worried about after that is what's the next variant to come. That's why really people want as many people as possible to get the vaccine, because there's an undeniable law of virology. Everyone agrees with this law of virology, that a virus that does not replicate will not mutate. In order for a virus to mutate, it's got to replicate. So if we can just simply stop it, not just locally, but nationally and hopefully globally, we can all be beyond this pandemic.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. And the thing is if you feel comfortable going out with a mask on, wear your mask. If you feel comfortable going out without a mask, don't wear a mask, but don't judge somebody else. Live your life, live your truth, do what's best for you. Don't speak where you're not the expert, and talk to your doctor. Talk to the experts. Like you said, I'd get a plumber to fix my plumbing. I'd get a tax accountant to fix my taxes. I'm damn well going to talk to a doctor that I trust, whether I should get the vaccination or not. We're given one life to live, and we're the only ones who can live our lives and live our truths. Live it to the most positive way possible. Give the best advice you can, and the best advice you can give anybody, go talk to your doctor. If you're unsure and you can't make the decision on your own, go talk to your doctor. Go talk to somebody that you trust and get expertise right from the horse's mouth, to somebody who's studied it, who's given up their 20s and then some, to, have that expertise behind them. Talk to the professionals. Now that we're getting nearer to the hour, what are the most profound thoughts that you can give to people to put them a little bit at ease and, set them in the right direction?
Yeah, so I want to give a little perspective on where we've been as a state. Like, in other words, it was about 500 days ago when we had patient number 1 in Rhode Island, 16 and a half months, right? But we've all gone through this pandemic and it's not quite done yet. So part of the perspective with this is like, we're not finished yet, but we've all gone through this population trauma. And I think one of the things we have to validate is like, we have to process in our own mind. We as a population have gone through a very traumatic experience, right? You probably know someone who passed away or was in the hospital. You may have lost someone very close to you. That's traumatic. Other things that may have happened to people is like, I couldn't go where I wanted to go. I couldn't do what I wanted to do. What if you're someone who had to be quarantined? What if you had to be isolated? These were new experiences for a lot of people. And that, quite frankly, as Americans in particular, we aren't used to this, right? Because this country was built on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. One of the things the pandemic taught us was you couldn't necessarily pursue happiness. And some people had their liberty restricted so we could preserve life. And that didn't go well with everybody. But one of the things you saw this is like, you may have lost a business. I mean, my brother in upstate New York was, owned a family pharmacy. Our grandfather started a pharmacy 90 years ago in upstate New York. It changed hands during the pandemic because it was just too hard to own an independent pharmacy anymore. But a lot of businesses just quite frankly failed. And these people's, lives were just decimated. But even getting to a more common level for everybody in this pandemic saw pain from the pandemic every day. If it was simply the inconvenience of wearing a mask every day, maybe you had some of the envy of like, some people working from home, whereas some people had to go to work in person. And that was hard for people. But the pandemic caused pain from one every day. And when you have pain every day from something, it's hard to kind of let go of that pain. So one of the things I think we as a population have to understand is, one, we've gone through a traumatic experience. Two, we've all gone through it, but we need to process in our own mind what's happened here, right? And if you understand what happened to you, then you have a better chance of getting to a little resilient recovery for you. Because part of what we have to do is like, when is it okay for me to go out and be with people again? I miss people. How do I interact with people again? Am I going to shake people's hands again? Well, I have hand sanitizer on the ready. Is that going to be okay? But part of it's going to be too just reconnecting with people. And one of the things I find for me that's been very part of my personal healing is just reconnecting with people. One of the things I'll just say is, I've been working back in the Department of Health during the day, and it's been fun to see people again. Some of them got a little bit, bigger during the pandemic, because that was one of the things we all struggled with, was eating more than we needed to. Others look identical to how I remember seeing them over a year ago. And I think it's to get this large issue. It's fun to see people again. But like, one of the things I've just noticed, I'm purposely going on my way to reconnect with people. I'm walking around the department saying hello to people. How are you? I'm checking in with people. And I think that connection is something we can all do with each other. And one of the things that I think will help us as a population really emerge from the pandemic stronger is just reconnecting with people. One of my most fondest memories of the pandemic so far was just walking in Lincoln Woods. I'm just walking in Lincoln Woods, and all of a sudden I'm walking Daisy, because Daisy likes to get out and walk. And all of a sudden this person walks next to me. She starts chatting about her dog. I'm chatting about my dog. And then she said, "Are you Dr. McDonald?" She recognized my voice. And we just had a lovely conversation for the next half hour. But it was like one of the things that I think I saw was just, I met a perfect stranger. But what is more fun than just connecting with somebody you don't know, getting to know about it, walking throughout Lincoln Woods? I'm outside exercising, and it was just a great conversation. But that reconnecting with people, that's going to heal a lot of the pain that we had. And then as we move forward a little bit smarter for the future, like one of the things I think we need to focus on is there's something called social determinants of health. These are little factors that make some people have an advantage or disadvantage. And I think one of the things we need to look at as a culture is when you look at why did certain parts of our population get sicker than other parts? Some of it was based on race, right? The Latinx population got hardest hit. But it wasn't because people who were Latinx were genetically predisposed to getting sick from COVID. It's because they had adverse or disadvantageous social determinants of health. In other words, a lot of these people are more likely to have to work in person, not work at home. Maybe they didn't have a computer in their home. They had to deal with a cell phone. In other words, these are circumstances that made you have a disadvantage in your health. And when we talk about social determinants of health, what we're really thinking is, what is it that gave someone an advantage, someone a disadvantage? Like someone like me, Tina, I could work from home. I could have my groceries delivered. I could have a computer in my home. I had some advantages. My wife and kids did as well. They could do school at home. They could work from home too. Now, if you had a family though, where you had to go to work in person, you only had one car and you had to carpool with people, you start adding risk to people. One of the things we really see as a culture we need to look at is, how do we make sure that everybody has similar advantages? Maybe not the same one, but at least similar advantages, so we don't have more people sick next time there's a problem like this.
And the one thing I like to say is everybody got a glimpse of the disabled community. You couldn't go out with people. You couldn't get in. You didn't have access. We live that every day. We live that isolation every day due to something so fixable as inaccessibility. You didn't like it. You didn't like that. Take us with you when the world opens up again. Meet somebody new, because I'll tell you, your best friend could be somebody sitting in a wheelchair or somebody from the disabled community that you never got the opportunity to meet because they couldn't get in. And the other thing during the pandemic is making sure that you all had your red bag. I know Dr. McDonald is a huge supporter of our red bag initiative. It's carrying all of your medical information on you at all times. And it's non-tech based. That is the most important thing. Go and get your red bag at www.rampasinclusion.com. Make sure you have it with you at all times. Keep it updated. It's a little card inside. You fill it out, you send it in, and you are, successful. And no matter where you go, you are covered. When I took my stroke, it saved my life because I was nonverbal at the time. Can you imagine me nonverbal? But I was nonverbal at the time. And that bag saved my life because all of my information was in that bag. So I want to thank you, Dr. McDonald, for your insight tonight and putting our minds at a little bit of ease and giving us guidance and making our community feel important, be seen, and be heard. So thank you so much for your participation tonight and your wisdom. Like I said, I enjoy watching you talk. I enjoy listening to you, and you are one of the doctors that I trust for your opinion. So thank you for being part of our show tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. And if people do want to listen more to myself and Dr. Chan, we have our own podcast called Public Health Out Loud. So if you're looking for one more podcast in your life, Public Health Out Loud, wherever you find your podcast is kind of fun. One place to find it is health.ri.gov/podcast. And it puts it there in every platform you want. And I will say this, one thing's about our podcast, we do talk about other things other than COVID. Any public health topic you can imagine, we're talking about it. We just finished season 1, recording our last episode yesterday, and we're looking forward to starting season 2 in a week or so. So that's fun for us.
So, yeah, and it's a great podcast. I've actually listened to it myself. It's where I get a lot of information from. I've had Dr. Chan on our podcast, and now I've had you on your podcast. So maybe someday you will see me on your podcast. But again, thank you so much for taking the time tonight and sharing your wisdom. We truly, truly appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing more of your words of wisdom moving forward.
Thank you, Tina. It's been fun hanging out with you for this hour.
Oh, thank you. And I want to invite everybody back next Wednesday, same time, 7 p.m. We will be talking to our famous Secretary of State, Nellie Gorbea, talking about how to make your business accessible, affordably, and inclusively, and all of the tax breaks out there for you, because having us wheeling into your business and being part of it and giving you our money just helps your bottom line. So tune in next Wednesday night at 7 p.m. for the Secretary of State, Nellie Gorbea. And as I always say, don't just sit there, make a difference. Have a great night, everybody. We'll see you next week.